Yeah.
Ta
How's the cat tour? How was it? It gets bigger and bigger every year. I mean, are you pulling a large block event permit through the Public Works and
no, it
Infrastructure
is.
Committee?
We have no permission to do what we're doing in the streets. Public Works Chair Andrew Johnson. We have no
Right.
permission. We didn't pay you any money. We're just out in the streets looking at cats. You're right.
All
It
right.
is bigger
That's
and bigger
amazing.
every year. Probably like 400 people. I have a hard time counting
Wow.
crowds, but it was more than last time, and last time was huge.
Fun story. I actually found out I was allergic after I adopted a cat.
Oh,
And then I was miserable and I went, well, I just adopted and it was an older cat too. So I felt bad. Yeah, I've given you your forever home and then I'm allergic. So I suffered through that.
no, to wait
Yeah,
till it died.
for 7 years until a family friend was willing to take it off my hands. So
Oh wow.
I
You
know.
adopted an old cat and it lived 7 more years just to make you miserable.
We're rolling. We're rolling.
Calling out cat people. This is a real thing. Real thing.
None of you have the balls to stop this. Stop this.
I've got plenty of time. I have nothing else going on today.
We're in the Wedge neighborhood right now. 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 Right now.
Our current chief is I've been extremely impressed with him. I mean, he is extremely empathetic. He shows up at an unbelievable amount of events. He doesn't seem to have any sort of inclination to defend the way that MPD has been managed or dysfunction within the organization. He's very candid about calling it out and saying things are unacceptable and pushing really hard to hold people accountable. I found him to be extremely responsive, and so I am impressed. The
What?
commissioner too. I really like our public safety commissioner as well. So
Really? You like Cedric Alexander? He gets
I
on my
do like
nerves. He gets
Cedric.
on my nerves. I don't take him seriously at all. I don't think he's up to the job. But I'm glad you like
Let's-
him.
I like Cedric. I think he's a kind of no nonsense type guy. I've had good experiences with him. And so, I think where sometimes maybe there's this piece is that I've noticed, he's not from Minnesota, so he's not the Minnesota nice type always. And sometimes that might
Yeah.
rub people away that they might make assumptions about him or whatever. But I think he's very well qualified and experienced and is doing good work.
You say no nonsense, I say 100% nonsense. He's a cliche machine. I don't know. We
He's
can agree to
make
disagree.
sound bites for or can make some sound bites too, for sure. But
I haven't done this
are
in a
we
while.
going now? Are we live?
No,
No.
we're not
All right.
live. This is a podcast. This is the Wedge Life podcast. I forgot to do the intro. My guest is Andrew Johnson. I'm your host, John Edwards, and I'm already losing my voice. Andrew Johnson, 3 terms on the city council. Tell us what you've learned. Something more people should know about their local government, as you call it, quits.
Oh boy. Man, it's been quite a ride over 10 years getting to work with some really amazing people and be a part of some really great things. And it's also been extremely challenging at times. So it's encapsulated the best and the worst moments of my life. And I think the thing moving forward or what to leave people with is around understanding how the process works of making change at City Hall and how, especially when you wrap a process around or you understand how that works, I think you can get a lot more things done. And then the other piece is not to underestimate the power of just working with others. And that's working with other from one council member to another, or council members and staff, or working with your local elected official. I mean, this isn't, we're not in federal office here It's if you were to go try to get a hold of a U.S. senator, for instance, they represent more than 5 million people in this state. That's going to be difficult to have a one-on-one conversation and have a lasting impact, but I think you really can at this level.
Is the city council working better at the end of your term? Worse? The same? Are certain things getting better and certain things getting worse? What comes to mind?
Yeah, I think probably a little worse. And why I say that is it seems like there's a change in the working together component of it, whereas maybe some of that collegiality, but I still think there's a lot there. But it seems like some of that has been in kind of more factionalization on the council has occurred. But I don't think that that's the trajectory it may necessarily continue on. I think after this government structure change, a lot's up in the air and there's a lot of instability, and everyone's trying to figure out what, when the dust settles, it ends up looking like and what the new norm is. And I think in that, there's an opportunity for the council to really come together more and exercise its powers.
I've noticed more polarization in the city in the last few years. Like, more people are paying attention to politics. More people have even stronger, more strongly held opinions about local politics than ever before. So I think that's having an impact.
Yeah, when I first was sworn in, I had maybe a year and a half that were kind of the almost two golden years in office where it seemed like a different world. And then as soon as Trump started running for office, civil discourse just started to kind of plummet, and there was more and more conflict and polarization. And at the same time, social media was becoming more of a factor in that as well. And just people willing to insult. I mean, next door is the worst. I'm just gonna put that out there. Hot take. It facilitates people calling their neighbors names. It's like somebody a block away who is so close to you, probably has a lot in common with you. You could have a good conversation with at a barbecue in the neighborhood, and they're, insulting one another over some trivial thing. And so it's not like there's no value in that site, but I think that and other social media platforms have really had an impact when we're talking about civil discourse.
So you had the opportunity to do an unusual thing. You moderated a Ward 12 candidate debate for,
Oh
oh,
my God.
your painting is falling off the wall. Do you need to get up and
Yes.
fix that, or are we concerned? Or
I
can it
think I
hang?
think it's good. I mean, I did not
Okay.
plan that.
Let's go the rest of the time with that just
All right.
askew.
Well,
You moderated a Ward 12 candidate debate, and I'm
yes.
wondering, what did you learn about the candidates? Give me a sense. Like, tell me about Maureen Chowdhury.
Yeah, well, I really enjoyed moderating it. The goal coming into that was that I wanted to get the candidates away from platitudes. So, a lot of times when you have debates, or forums, you end up hearing folks just say things like, I want to make the city a safer, healthier, happy place and more
Right.
jobs and cleaner air, which are all great goals. And the thing is, I'm guessing every candidate shares those goals. So, how are you going to do that? And let's actually get into specifics. And so, the questions were really geared at being as specific as possible around policy ideas you want to bring forward, how you're going to accomplish things. I asked follow-up questions as well if I didn't feel like the candidates were specific enough. We kept the time frame short, and so that they would be forced to try to answer the question as directly as possible rather than kind of getting lost in the time. And I thought it went really well overall, and we got good feedback from it. And I thought Aureen did a really great job as well answering questions, because you asked
I-
specifically about her. I thought
Right.
all the
I was
candidates,
gonna ask
frankly,
about both.
I frankly thought all the candidates did a good job answering questions. at that. I was surprised by the level of depth that they added and the different answers that they came up with. The goal is to try to get contrast as well with them. So
Right.
there'd be open-ended questions like, if you could pick one agency to work with around one issue over the next 2 years, which agency would that be? And you heard different answers. Some said Metro Transit around light rail safety and such. I believe somebody mentioned the county, somebody else mentioned the park board. I mean, so you got to see the different ways that they thought about the issues and what the priorities were.
Are you willing to give me anything you learned about either Luther Ranheim or Aureen Chowdhury? Did you learn anything in particular about these two? Differentiate these candidates for us, because nobody wants to watch that candidate for them. They want to listen to this podcast
Oh
and hear
man,
it
if that
straight
was
from
my
you.
homework assignment, I could have totally given you a really good answer on that. I mean, you know, part of the thing is this job is like drinking from a fire hose. So I'm reading through, hundreds of pages of stuff every week. And so that feels like years ago, to be honest. And when was that? Was that
Right.
a few months ago?
I mean,
So
and it
I,
doesn't have
I'll,
to
I'll
be
tell
anything.
you,
Doesn't have
I
to be anything
mean,
specific from that night. Just like, I don't know, anything from the campaign. I'm just like, for somebody just tuning in, how are they coming off to you? And no platitudes, specificity. Andrew Johnson.
yeah, so I think Aureen is definitely, if you're talking on the ground here, and by the way, full transparency, I've endorsed Aureen. And so that'll roll out, I think, in the next week or so. But going up into the convention, I did not endorse any candidate because I didn't want to be putting my thumb on the scale during that process, because I was running against an incumbent and had that incumbent back in 2013 put her thumb on the scale. And, there's some issues there that I wanted to be mindful of with that, because it's ultimately a decision for the voters. But Aureen has the momentum. Aureen has done a really great job connecting with constituents, of building support, of building and leveraging her relationships with other elected officials, which, by the way, is a really important aspect of being on the city council, that intergovernmental relations role. She's shown that she's really thoughtful around issues. And even though she's the leftmost candidate in the race, she's also open-minded. She's listening to everybody in the ward. She understands that aspect of trying to serve the whole ward, even knowing, though, that there's going to be areas where people will disagree with her on the positions she takes. And she also comes in on day one having worked at City Hall and being best able to hit the ground running. And so I liked in the conversations that I've had with her how thoughtful she is around issues as well. And so, she's earned my support. She earned the DFL endorsement very clearly. And I think she's going to make an excellent council member.
Okay. So what's the biggest public safety question this year? We went through 2021, a long emotional debate about public safety. It still feels like a top issue, but I'm having trouble putting my finger on like what is the question to ask? Like when you moderated that forum, maybe you don't remember the exact question you asked, but what is a good question to ask candidates this year about public safety? Because police staffing does not feel like the question, because it feels like that trajectory is set. We're at a low point. I don't know if it matters who we elect. Like we're clawing out of that hole still, and for years to come. Do you think there's a better question than like funding and staffing of police?
Yeah, I do. I think if I remember the question I asked at the forum, it was, and to be fair, there were multiple questions around public safety, but I think kind of the key one is within your authority on the council, right? Within your authority, what are you specifically going to do to move the needle on public safety? Recognizing that you don't have a vote on MPD policy, and so you can't bring forward an ordinance on MPD policy. And there's a lot of budgetary constraints in terms of what you can do. And so what's it going to be? What is the if you could accomplish one thing or do one move over the next 2 years, what's that going to be? So, and then that opened up the door for a variety of answers from folks around partnership with other agencies and trying to secure that, at least using the influence side of things around behavioral crisis response teams and continuing to build that out around stabilizing folks within community, restorative justice efforts. I mean, there's a lot of different approaches that can be taken within one's authority on the council.
So looking back at your 10 years, do you have anything like you wish we had done better on public safety on the council side, I guess? I mean, the list is long on the executive side because that's where the power is, but you have any regrets, things you wish had gone differently?
Yeah, and maybe this one kind of blurs the line because it would require the executive side. But one of the things I advocated for back to Betsy Hodges and Janae Harteau, and then again with our current mayor and with our chief Arredondo was a quality assurance program within MPD. And basically, here's my pitch. So every call center in America, you call them and they say, and they have this pre-recorded message that says this call is being recorded for quality assurance purposes. And what they do is they randomly review those calls and sit down with the call center agent who handles calls, each one regularly, and they say, okay, we audited or reviewed, this call, let's wash it together. Let's talk about what you did really well and what you could do better. And let's come up with a plan and let's track this stuff over time. And my point to Mayor Hodges and Mayor Fry, MPD administration is every officer has a body camera on them. And we're recording that footage. To me, police officers are in a more important role when it comes to quality than most call centers, right? Because it can involve life or death. It can involve injury and all of that. And so for the public and for officers. And so, and not to mention credibility, all of these aspects. And so we should be sitting down with every single officer, in my opinion, every single officer, and doing that quality assurance work of saying, hey, we've watched the footage, not council, quality assurance team has watched the footage. Here's what you did well. Here's what you could do better. And what you'd see come out of that are a couple of things. One thing is you would be able to better identify who are the high performing officers. And those are the folks you filter up into leadership positions over time. And that helps with the cultural change aspects. But the other thing is for officers that are having problematic behavior, it allows an opportunity to address it, especially before it grows, because oftentimes it doesn't manifest itself in a critical incident right away, or an officer involved shooting or excessive force complaint or something like that. Oftentimes it can start as being rude, for example, to the public that you're interacting with. And to know that each interaction also is potentially being watched also provides that incentive as well to make sure you're giving it 100% on each and every call. And so that's the one I look back on going, if that was implemented, I think we'd be ahead of where we are today significantly.
Yeah, I mean, that sounds like a great proactive idea. But then you think about all the ways like complaints from people who feel like they've had a bad interaction or they were abused in some way, insulted, all kinds of misconduct.
Mhm.
Those complaints come in, and it feels like those aren't even being handled. Things where you have even more of an indication that things are going wrong. It's hard not to feel like a proactive step like that would just be, a nice thing that doesn't really get followed through on in an effective way. Maybe you find something and it ends up in coaching and no one cares. It's not public. There's no way to know that there's a problem there.
Well, and that's because, today those sort of things are not being tracked to the level by a professional team whose job it is to oversee and manage that, as you would have with a quality assurance team. And so I think one of the challenges today is now the difficulty in implementing something like that is that you end up having the staffing come into play, right? And so that's going to be the biggest piece of opposition to trying to implement a program like this now is, oh, so you're going to take officers off the streets when we're already short, they're already working overtime to sit them down for something that, the naysayers will say is a nice to have rather than a need to have. The reality is, though, that, quality assurance program is a best practice in these type of industries with a lot of direct contact with the public.
Right. So you did a dangerous thing here today. You brought a slideshow to a podcast.
No, an Excel file.
Oh, it's not a slideshow.
It's
okay.
even better, yes.
Okay, it's an Excel file. So are you
Yeah.
ready to share your screen? I don't know when we're going to get to your Excel file, but we're going to talk about rent stabilization policy.
Yeah, let's talk about it. And so I brought a few different things, but one of them was to illustrate, for instance, rent banking. So you said when you reached out, you wanted to get into the weeds or the
Yeah, a little
nuance
bit. I
on
mean,
rent stabilization.
like you said, talking to candidates, it's hard to get. Nobody wants to be all that detailed. I'm not great at challenging people, but I like to hassle you, and so I thought we would have like we could talk about some policy here in a way that I haven't had a lot of chances to do.
All right, perfect.
So you have said you would support a policy. You are in support of the general idea of having a policy, and it's all about like what's in it. And you're opposed to the the most stringent version of rent stabilization that's been
Correct.
introduced and is working its way through and can be amended. So I'm wondering, like, why not vote in support of having that be introduced and go through the process so you can amend it later? Why did you cast that vote? I was curious.
I've never seen a drafting process like this before. I haven't. I mean, to me, it makes no sense, or it's not the approach that I think is how you end up ultimately getting a policy passed at the end of the day. Typically, you would do a notice of introduction and just say, hey, I'm working on this thing, rent stabilization or rent control, and that would get introduced. Most of the time it would get what's called referred to staff, and that's really where then the council members are working with staff on drafting. They're working with other council members to try to understand what's palatable, what ultimately at the end of the day is going to get the votes. That's where they're working with external stakeholders and bringing their perspectives and their voices into the conversation. And then they develop out the policy, they bring it forward, which ends up having a public hearing and then an opportunity to amend. And then it gets either voted through at the end of the day or voted down. And in this case, a big proposal is essentially being brought forward pivoted out of this work group. And it is the most, as you mentioned, extreme version, and is being told, hey, come vote on this version. And then later you can vote a different way or vote to amend it. And that's just not what I'm going to do. I don't believe that this is a good policy. So I'm not going to vote for it now, vote for it now and then say, okay, later I'll vote against it though. I mean, it just isn't, it doesn't make sense to me that you would do it that way.
Feels like the work group thing was a distraction and it was about kicking the can into the next year. It feels like we could have had a regular like drafting process if it started last year. And I don't know how much of the government structure thing is playing into this and like making it known to the city attorney's office, like this is what we need you to draft. And the city clerk has this new legislative process that he's trying to implement. And I think he used the word pilot. So I don't know how much, I don't know if we can blame necessarily council member Chugtai, and I'm not saying you're blaming her for anything, but like, is it a process problem, a policy problem? I don't want to get too deep in the weeds on the process necessarily, but those are some of the thoughts rattling through my brain.
Yeah, no, it's a great question. Even before this term began, I was talking with incoming council members who were passionate about this policy. And I said, the first or second meeting is when you should form a work group and get it done and have a goal to try to get it on the ballot in 2022. And that no longer became an option because that process was not on that level of timeline. It took a while before language was brought forward around the work group and what the makeup would be and all of that. And then, the work group ended up doing their work in the later part of last year. And as far as I understand, kind of the start of December, they ended up voting on their recommendation, but then we didn't get the final report for a while after that. That took a while as well. And I know there was this staff report that they had tried to outsource too. And so there's a bunch of different pieces at play, but the reality is that we also could have been having conversations in parallel as well in order to figure some of this stuff out a lot sooner. And to be fair, I want to give a shout out to the Faith in Minnesota folks because they have been having those conversations for quite a while. They've been really great advocates, and they've been really focused on what can we do to actually get a policy that is just, I'm sure my wall is falling down over here. I don't know what's going on. I get on this podcast.
Are you alone in the house?
Yes.
Because I hear lots of noises.
Yeah,
Someone is
no,
in there
it's
with
like-
you, Andrew Johnson.
It's the ghost of some former council member, apparently, that doesn't want me talking about rent control or something. But so long story short, it was, I think, delayed process-wise, not saying intentionally. I think unintentionally, it just fell behind, took way too long, but stuff could have been worked in parallel. And I think now there's this rush at the last moment trying to get everything done before the window is missed on getting something on the ballot.
So here's a really key question. Is the process too broken for you here? You just disagree with the process so much that you can't vote for anything? Or is there a version of this that can be amended? You can arrive at something this year that you could actually vote yes for?
The latter. So yes, I think that it's not too broken to continue working ahead. I think that we should work on this and try to reach a consensus. I also think you got to think about the path to how you get something on the ballot. You either need 7 council members and the mayor in support, or you need 9 council members willing to override the mayor. And so, and I'm excited to get into the weeds with you on this. I have been excited earlier today to have a conversation with Councilmember Chugtai. Just the start, and we're going to have more conversations. Already saw one scheduled around what supportable policy could look like. But I also have to acknowledge, right, that I'm not going to end up being the 9th vote on this. I will be a 7th vote most likely. You know what I mean? In the sense of I'm to the left of some other council members that you would still need in order to get to 9. I'm going to be to the left of, I'm sure, the mayor's position. So at the end of the day, I think, there's the mayor and a couple of my colleagues who are not where I am on rent stabilization. They're going to probably be in more of the driver's seat around what the ultimate details are in a policy.
You're the 7th vote. Jenkins is maybe the 8th vote. Paul Masano is maybe the 9th vote. I don't know if anyone else is willing to vote for it. Maybe Koski. Are you going to reveal what your negotiating points are? You want to get into rent banking? You want to include
we
rent
can get
rent
into some
banking?
details, but rent banking is a great example of that. And rent banking is one where I was really surprised not to see it included in the recommendation. I actually went back and looked at the notes around it and did not see a ton of discussion around the point I'm about to show you. Rent banking is one where it essentially always is beneficial to tenants. And I will illustrate that in a moment. And I will describe it as well for your audience. Although,
So rent banking, and I'll explain it here as you're getting your Excel sheet up, is you let the landlords not increase rent 1 year or the second year or the third year and just bank that increase for the future and hold the rent steady year to year if they choose. And
Exactly. And
without rent
so
banking, the argument is there's an incentive to max out your increases every year.
exactly. Now, can you see the screen?
I
The
can.
Excel?
Yeah.
Okay, perfect. So you're absolutely right about that. So if you don't allow for rent banking, you are creating an incredibly powerful incentive to increase rent for a landlord to increase rent by 3% every single year. And part of that is a factor of both the frequency and the size of the allowable rent increase. Essentially, if you don't increase 3% every single year, you will fall behind very quickly compared to what you would otherwise be at if you are a landlord. And so, without rent banking, you can pretty much bet or guarantee that pretty much every unit in the city, or nearly every unit in the city, is going to increase by 3% per year in rent. And the landlords are frankly just going to blame the city policy for this, as I think would be fair for them to do, to say, if I don't do this, I'm going to fall behind. So, as you mentioned, the idea of rent banking is being able to store that up. So if the landlord says, I like my tenants because they pay their rent on time. I don't want to see them move out. So you know what? I'm not going to increase rent this year. And then I'm not going to increase it next year or the year after. Maybe I'll wait until they move out of the unit. That's the idea behind rent banking. So I created this scenario here, which you can see, and I'll describe for your audio listeners. And this really shows 6 total years of renting. Now, that was an arbitrary number just to kind of make the math easier on understanding, but 5 years of rent increases because you assume your first year you're not increasing rent. And I'm showing the first scenario over here on the left is what happens without rent banking. And so you'll see that in a minute when I enter in the starting monthly rent. And then with rent banking, you'll be able to see what happens if the landlord were to wait until the very last year and ultimately do a 15% increase in just 1 year, if they had banked up 5 years of 3% increases. And then, not to get too into the weeds here, but I added a compounding version as well, because if you do a 3% increase every year for 5 years, it actually compounds the rate and is closer to a 16% increase. And so let's pick a rent, let's say $1,000 a month. And what you can see here is that in the first year, that $1,000 a month rent adds up to $12,000 a year. And you can look at what happens when you apply 3% and you go down the line over a course of 6 years, and you can see the grand total paid. Now, with rent banking, in this scenario where in the final year, or in 6 years in, 5 years in rather, the landlord applies 15%, you can see what the grand total would be. Now, is this a lot in terms of an increase in a given year, 15%? Yes, it is. That also, by the way, is the worst case scenario with rent banking. This landlord may never, while that tenant is in the unit, apply an increase if they have the option of rent banking. They might apply only 5 or 10%. And usually it's situational. If there's a significant change in their financials or in what they're seeing in the market, or that sort of thing, or in property taxes or in insurance, that would cause them to do that sort of an increase. And at the bottom, you can see that if you are operating without rent banking and you face a 3% increase every year for 5 years in a row with a starting monthly rent of $1,000, you are losing out on between $3,700 and $3,800 a year as a tenant. That is how much extra money is being extracted from you as a tenant over the course of those ultimately 6 years in a unit and being transferred over to your landlord. And you can see with rent banking, both simple or compounding, that you ultimately save money, again, under this worst case scenario of applying that full amount of the rent banking in that final year. And so another way to look at this is, and again, you think about this is it being applied. What happens if you don't apply it, right? What happens if it's a 0% increase? And so you can see if it's 0%, it's actually more like $5,600 that you end up saving as a tenant because you have rent banking as an option. Now, I took that and I applied that to a table of both your monthly rent paid and your years in a rental. And you can see how it ties out here. And granted, the stylizing of this isn't the best, but at $1,000 a month at year 6, you get that $5,621 that you saved as a tenant if your landlord did not increase your rent. Or vice versa, if your landlord had no rent banking as an option and they raised rent by 3% every single year, you'd be out $5,621, which is your maximum loss exposure. And so with this table, you can see the amounts of money that ultimately end up getting transferred out to from tenants to landlords without rent banking. So, the only argument that I can really think of against rent banking is that the policy is designed, the idea of rent stabilization is that you're trying to protect people from double-digit rent increases, unless there's a exceptional circumstance, right? And so I could see in some ways people arguing that, allowing rent banking would work against the policy goal. However, I think that is oversimplifying and short-sighted because at the end of the day, if it ends up costing tenants more money through this 3% increase, then it is basically like forcing the tenants to pay insurance essentially in order not to face a double-digit rent increase, and not just a little insurance, a lot of insurance, as you can see here.
Okay, if you're listening to this as a podcast, Andrew Johnson has just gone through multiple minutes of scintillating Excel math on the screen. Get over to youtube.com/wedge live and so you can see it for yourself. I think the rent banking is an easy one to negotiate. I'm assuming you could win that one easily because it just makes sense. How about vacancy control versus vacancy decontrol? It's different, but sort of related to rent banking, because often what vacancy decontrol means for the audience is after one tenant leaves, the rent is uncontrolled. Landlord can set it for whatever it wants, they want. And the argument against that is without just cause eviction protections, that incentivizes evictions. So what's your stance on vacancy control versus decontrol?
Yeah, so first off, I support vacancy decontrol. And I'll take a step back though, because I think what's important when thinking about the policy is what's your goal at the end of the day. And so in that, I would almost say you could answer with the definition of rent stabilization versus rent control. With rent stabilization, to me, the goal is preventing a double-digit rent increase or really exorbitant year-over-year rent increases while a tenant is in unit, unless there's some really exceptional circumstance. And that's where you see things like even with Framework 5 around repairs as a pass-through, right? When I talk to advocates, there's also a secondary goal, which I've heard from some, which is that they believe that they want to suppress the market price over time so that prices in the market, whether a tenant is in the unit or not, are lower than they would otherwise be. So they want to essentially, the mechanics are the same of a price ceiling, of pushing down the price over time. And I think that's really problematic. That is going to, and you see this in the Cura study, result in a short supply of housing, which, by the way, was the whole point of going after single family zoning with the 2040 plan, is that the whole market got really screwed up a generation ago by being too restrictive and ended up reducing the amount of supply on the market. We're living with that now. We're paying for that now. And now we're talking about a policy that is also going to reduce the amount of supply as well. And that's been seen in the studies. And what ends up happening when that supply is reduced is that it ends up becoming very difficult to find an apartment, whether you're moving, whether you are a new, like you're growing up in the city, right? And now you're new to renting yourself and trying to find a place. And what it does is it introduces a lot of incentives because of that shortage in order for landlords to try to offset the additional financial risk involved, because now you've limited the upside piece of that. And so you have arguably, because you've limited the upside, you now have introduced more risk for the downside. And so that creates a powerful incentive for landlords to find better tenants. And a better tenant is, from a landlord perspective, probably going to be somebody, right, who's never missed a rent payment, who has a higher income, those sort of factors, never had a complaint from past renting circumstances, all of that. And so the other risk or the other problem with vacancy decontrol, besides being detrimental to the overall supply, is that for units that come online, it's actually going to set that price higher. And so a good example of that, and I'm going to pull up the screen again.
So we could solve that by just doing the new construction exemption as far as housing production goes.
For new units?
Yeah.
To a degree, but it doesn't solve for folks, for instance, who are like the mom and pop landlords that are taking a single family home and going out to rent it. Or, you know, as my family grows, for instance, right? If we end up moving out of this home to a larger one, it doesn't solve for that of what's going to happen in the marketplace when we go to rent. It will ultimately rent for a higher price because now you have essentially messed with the market dynamics in a way that you are getting higher demand overall.
So I'm curious how you solve for the tension between decontrol and the incentive to evict tenants, get a new tenant in there so you can just jack that rent up. How do you solve for that?
Just cause eviction.
So you would make sure to implement that. Are we legally allowed to implement that? Has that been decided? I know St. Paul, I think, has just cause eviction protection now in conjunction with their newly revised ordinance, right?
That is generally my understanding, but I from my understanding, there's a path for this in Minneapolis.
Okay, so we could implement just cause eviction protections as we adopt the rent stabilization policy this year.
Yeah. Now, what you're going to hear from advocates that are pushing for Framework 5 is that decontrol with just cause eviction still doesn't get to that second or that additional goal, right, of suppressing market prices, which is really represented here.
Are we doing math? Andrew Johnson, I can't believe you're putting this on my screen. Really, I mean, everyone get to youtube.com/Wedge Live and look at what he's doing to me. What is this?
This is a supply-demand curve. And so if you're not familiar with this, you could probably just Google Economics 101, watch some YouTube videos about how this action works in general. But this is pretty well settled science around economics and how it works. And so this really illustrates, when you learn to read this, I suppose, what happens and when you end up ultimately having your price lower than the market equilibrium, which I'm not sure if you can see my cursor moving around.
I see it. Yeah.
Okay, perfect. Around the intersection of supply and demand, when you have a price ceiling that pushes that price downward at the end of the day, what you end up having is you create a gap between supply over here and demand over here. And what ends up happening is at these supply levels, new housing introduced, which would be allowed to be introduced at whatever price you can get it for, would ultimately be at a higher level. So it's just widening that gap as well, even when that comes to older homes, for instance.
I think I understand supply and demand pretty well, and
Mhm.
that chart made me understand it less. So
I'm sorry. I can sit down with you, come by anytime.
no, I
We'll
already
walk through
understand
it.
it. You're making me understand it less by showing me this.
All right. Well, go check out go check out price ceilings and the supply demand curve. Go read about it. It's fascinating stuff. I would not do so right before bed, but yeah.
So, any quick answers now because we're running out of time and I got so much more. New construction exemption. Do you have like a time frame in mind? I'm assuming you support something like that.
We absolutely should. Really, the issue there is around being able to get financing for
Okay.
projects. And so that is working with, frankly, financial institutions to understand the math around that. I've heard 20 to 30 years typically. I mean, that would make sense given loan periods for a lot of these projects.
Okay. Have we missed anything else on rent stabilization? Is there another like big sticking point that I'm not thinking of?
I don't think so off the top of my head, but
Okay.
well, the only thing is, and I think it goes right back to what was talked about with in Framework 5 around repairs, right? And they also included capital improvements, and there's some outstanding questions there around does that potentially contribute to gentrification, right? If you're allowing pass through of large capital improvements, and if that's kind of ends up getting viewed as a vehicle towards increasing rents, I think that's something the work group discussed about, could there be a board review or those sort of things. But, really at the end of the day, what this comes down to, I think, and you can talk about this as thinking about for how you mitigate unintended consequences or significant negative consequences around a policy like this is the unexpected, unanticipated costs that landlords face. And so you don't just have repairs, the potential of, you might have a $20,000 repair in a given year that just totally changes the balance sheets and makes it really no longer feasible to kind of continue on a trajectory, that sort of thing, with the levels that would be allowed in a policy like this. And that's something the work group recognized and why you saw the pass through. But there are other unexpected expenses that can pop up or uncontrolled by the landlord side. And that even includes things like property taxes and insurance. So you can
We're
have, I mean, there's parts of this city where they faced where you saw homes getting hit with 50% plus levy increases, given the way that properties are assessed.
So let's think about back to the arguments in favor of our new government structure. It was going to be delivering more efficiently, more equitable outcomes, better government. Is it delivering as promised? Are we
Are
going
you
to get
reading from a
there?
list or something? Is this from a campaign website or where did
No,
you?
those are my memories of the arguments
Okay.
in favor of it. Yeah, is that not how you remember it?
Yeah, I mean, I heard elements of efficiency and yep, the pieces around knowing who's
Equity,
in charge and
even
I don't know
equity
if
was an
that was a
argument.
really. I
Yeah,
don't.
they said this is going to deliver more equitable government, which I thought was not correct. But so how's it
Uh,
working out?
TBD.
It's still, are we
The
making?
dust hasn't settled. I mean, here's the problem. And it's I think especially hard for folks like myself who have been around for a while and had operated well under the previous structure, right? That I am biased in this, uh, and so, but it's what the voters decided, and so we have implemented the voters' will on this thing. I think it is TBD though on it, because department heads, as at least as so much as I have heard, are still working to kind of figure it out. We haven't seen the build out yet of the legislative side of things. They're still working on filling out positions over on the executive side. There's these questions around how information gets shared between the executive and the legislative, and some departments working closer to share information versus others. And so all of those sort of things are still getting hashed out in all of this. And I would say there's still this question of what's the new dynamic going to be at the end of the day? Is it going to be, and by the way, this might change from mayor to mayor, but is it going to be the mayor ends up working closer with council, or the mayor ends up being more insular and there's a wall dividing the council and the mayor? Or are you going to see the council potentially leaning into more so where we have authority, for instance, utilizing policy making to help guide the hands of the executive branch on some of these topics a little more heavily than we have in the past, or perhaps utilizing our budgetary powers a little more heavily than has been done so far. So I think this is probably the sort of thing that's 5 to 10 years before we really can look back on it and say this is what it ended up being. And I bring to all of this, by the way, I'm a former systems engineer. So when we go into the weeds on rent control, rent stabilization, all these sort of things, I'm trying to be nuanced and fair to these sort of things. So I think there's some aspects that are improved by probably the government structure. I also think there's aspects that I miss and that I think are unfortunate for the people of Minneapolis.
Here's sort of my fundamentally, I've realized that my argument against it is fundamentally conservative. Like there's safety in a group of 13 people because no one person can screw this up. We are destined to elect a really bad, terrible, awful, corrupt mayor at some point. No matter what you think about our current mayor, we're going to get a mayor you don't like, whether you're a progressive, moderate, or conservative. We're going to have a disastrous mayor at some point, and things are going to go really bad because one person is in charge, and I worry about that all the time.
Well, and that was kind of the irony of it, is that there was the unspoken or sometimes spoken piece of it was that you don't want the council in charge of things like public safety. Like it seemed like, to me, it seemed like a lot of this was a response, even though if you ask some folks, this was, being worked on for a very long time. It just so happened to come up during that election year. But I don't think you can divorce it from the context of what was happening with the conversation around the council and public safety and the mayor. And, so there was this argument or this unspoken piece of it that you don't want this council because the council is too radical or lefty or what have you. And wouldn't it be better if just a mayor was making a lot of decisions, particularly in this executive sphere? And when I would talk with people about this, and that was their concern, I would say, careful what you wish for, because you may have a mayor in several years from now who decides, I'm going to take away the guns from all of our police officers, right? They could implement that policy and there would be no recourse,
right?
Because you can't recall an elected official in our city. And so, you know what I mean? So I tend to think like you do of checks and balances are a good thing in government. And it removed multiple. I mean, even if you think about department heads, the council can no longer remove department heads. So
this is a terrible question to ask here right at the end, but does the city council, you're chair of the Public Works Committee at this point, does the council have power to designate bus lanes? What do you think of the debate over whether the council can designate a full-time bus lane? Is that just a garbage argument, or does the mayor and his Public Works Department have legal standing to say, no, you don't actually have the power to decide the hours of these lanes?
It was interesting because we tested something there that really hadn't been necessarily tested because the council has the ability to approve and the authority to approve layouts. So the idea was, can we designate on the layout itself the hours? And it got into this gray area on it. And clearly there was a difference of opinion between the executive and the legislative branches on this. But the nuanced answer, again, nuance, right, and all this stuff, is that there are ways for the council to have authority around that, even if it's not directly with that layout. You know, the council could certainly consider ordinances around our parking policy, around those sort of things, and could apply more broadly across the city, or how bus lanes work across the city more broadly. So there are paths there legislatively. But that said, I do think it's better when the different stakeholders involved, even intergovernmentally, are working together with one another. And so that's, I think, at the end of the day, you know, being a council member, there's a lot of power in your ability to go vote on an issue at council. But in terms of the power that a council member has, in some ways, that's actually amongst the least powerful things a council member can do. And I think the ability to influence and to build consensus or negotiate is more powerful. And even though it wasn't as strong as we wanted, at the end of the day, we got a plan that does have at least 6+ hours of dedicated lanes on Hennepin on day one. And I think it's going to ramp up from there.
How's your back feel? I know for a time you were standing during council meetings frequently. Is your back okay now?
Oh, that's so sweet of you. Thank you, John. And before we get off, I also want to ask about the cat tour, by the way. But the back is something I manage. Yeah, it's amazing how I actually have a bad back and I've got glaucoma. So I feel old, but it's doing good right now, and it is something that flares up from time to time, and when it does, it sucks. So for your listeners out there, I would say take care of yourselves. You'd be surprised. When I was younger, I thought, oh, you're either born with a bad back or maybe some catastrophic injury or something, but otherwise you're fine. And it turns out that's not necessarily the case for a lot of people. It's a super common thing. And at its worst, it was basically 10 out of 10 pain where I couldn't stand up for a very long time. And I spent 3 days in the hospital and unable to walk or move. And, you know, now I'm able to get back to most of my stuff, but my life has kind of changed. I can't really ride in a car more than an hour, or sit more than an hour, sort of a thing, without getting up, moving around a bit, or taking medication or those sort of things. So
I have a selfish reason for asking this question. My
Yes.
back has started hurting. I'm also a very tall man, just like you. My back has started hurting. I think I've narrowed it down to my mattress is too old. I don't know. I think I'm getting really bad sleep. I may be like sinking into the mattress too much. And it started to be painful for me to walk like modest distances. And I walk a ton. So it was very frightening. I need to figure out my back issues. You and I share back issues in common. The last question is recommendations. Do you want to ask me about the cat tour first?
Well, yeah. And we could chat offline too about the back stuff, but we'll figure that out.
Okay.
Maybe some stretches or some exercises and stuff. We gotta, keep it healthy, right? So
Yeah.
How's the cat tour? How was it? It gets bigger and bigger every year. I mean, are you pulling a large block event permit through the Public Works and Infrastructure Committee?
We have no permission to do what we're doing in the streets. Public Works Chair Andrew Johnson. We have no permission. Right. We didn't pay you any money. We're just out in the streets looking at cats. You're right. It is bigger and bigger every year. Probably like 400 people. I have a hard time counting crowds, but it was more than last time, and last time was huge. So
that's so great. I mean, is it ever going to expand into other parts of the city? Kind of like an open streets type thing. You could do different areas.
I don't know where the cats are in other neighborhoods, so it would be difficult for me. Yeah,
I'm allergic. So that's why I
Oh,
wasn't there. But
well,
which
we're far
fun?
enough away. There's glass between you and
Yeah,
the
that's true.
cats.
Fun story. I actually found out I was allergic after I adopted a cat.
Oh,
And then I was miserable and I went, well, I just adopted and it was an older cat too. So I felt bad. Yeah, I've given you your forever home and then I'm allergic. So I suffered through that.
you had to wait
Yeah,
till it died.
for 7 years until a family friend was willing to take it off my hands. So
Oh, wow.
I
You
know.
adopted an old cat and it lived 7 more years just to make you miserable.
I gave that cat love though and attention and treated it very well, even though I
Okay.
was stuffed up and all of that.
Andrew Johnson, take a drink from your giant mug and prepare for the final question, which is
All right, what's the
recommendations.
final question?
Think about things that you enjoy, not just hydration, other things. It could be a walk in a park, it could be a place or an animal, or time spent with family, a movie, a book, a game. What do you enjoy that you think others would enjoy? Recommend something to our audience.
Oh, wow. That's a great question. I will recommend skate skiing.
Skate skiing, what is that?
Skate cross country skiing. I
Well, the
got into
summer.
it a couple years ago, and I'm going to recommend it in the middle of summer. Here's why, though. Here's my pitch. So, prior to skate skiing, I thought, well, winter is, okay, it's, I can survive it. It's fine, whatever. Not really enjoyable, but skate skiing unlocked winter for me. And I actually look forward to it now. It's actually enjoyable because you're getting out there, you're getting your heart rate up, and you're essentially floating across the landscape. It's super fun. But here's the kicker, not the kicker, here's the issue with it. It's going to take you about 4 or 5 times at least before you really get the hang of it. You're going to be miserable your first 1 or 2 times. So you can go rent skis, which then you're probably not going to go out a second or third time. Or you can take the gamble, go out and buy skis, used is fine too, save yourself some money, and then commit. And I did that approach. And so I went out and my first time fell like 20 times and just had that moment from Arrested Development and went, I've made a huge mistake.
Mhm.
But kept at it because I bought the skis and ended up loving it. So
So
there you go.
I know what skiing is. I don't know what skate skiing is. What is the difference?
So the regular cross country, you're kind of going like this, and your skis are going like this along the. And for folks listening, I'm kind of going back and forth, almost like a walk. And you can, I'm sure, get a great workout doing the classic. But skate skiing is more like kind of you're skating like across snow,
Hmm.
and you build up good momentum, and it's just great. You feel like you're floating along the landscape. It's so fun.
Do you have any video of yourself doing this? I feel like
No,
the tall men like ourselves would look especially goofy doing an activity like
probably.
that.
Oh,
It's possible.
who are you gonna have on next from City Hall?
I don't have anyone scheduled. I'm having a hard time getting Linnea Palmisano, Emily Koski.
Really?
I'm not worthy of a response.
Are you
I
gonna get
will
the?
admit I've said some things about Linnea Palmisano. I don't blame her for not coming on, but Emily Koski, come on, we could be friends. I
Yeah,
don't.
yeah. Well, I can put in a word with any of my colleagues or anyone at City Hall. I would love to see you and Casey Carl have a conversation.
Oh,
So
really? Is he allowed to come on? I
he,
don't know if
I feel like he
staff
can
at
do
the
what he
city
wants.
probably need permission. Really, is he an
I
entity unto
mean,
himself?
well, he reports to the city council.
Right.
So it's not like up through the administration a different way. I feel like it's less restrictions on him generally. But that would be fascinating because he has just a ton of history, and I'm sure he couldn't, you know, like
Yeah.
uh, say certain things, but um,
Oh,
like the most ridiculous thing he's heard from a council member or something. But
it's true.
uh, that would be a fun one to watch. Are you gonna try to get the mayor on here?
I don't think the mayor's coming on. I don't know how pleasant that would be. Of course, we would be nice to each other, but I don't. It'd be hard to get a straight answer. You know, you're talking about talking to candidates, not getting a straight answer. I feel like we would not produce any new information there. But I remember what we were going to talk. Third precinct. Do you have a quick answer to that one here at the
Oh
end?
yeah.
Let's open up that can of worms. Should there be a third precinct? We can do a quick one. You don't have to be.
Yes, there should within the third precinct. This approach was definitely the wrong approach that was taken, and in my opinion, and there was this radio silence essentially for years, and then to rush out a process and say, okay, which one of these two sites do you want? One of them being the old third precinct building that is tied completely to all of the collective trauma of George Floyd's murder and the subsequent uprising and civil unrest within community. I mean, it caused harm, I think, the way that it was handled. And so I think there needs to be a step back. I hope that the door is closed on the old third precinct location being a police precinct, and that there are essentially 4 community engagement series that are kicked off. And one of them is, what has the police department done around reform since George Floyd was murdered? Another series on public safety, and that'll include crime concerns, which is a hot topic in various parts of the city. Another conversation on what should happen to that old third precinct building and what different purpose can it serve. And then the last one being, what should the city do in terms of, or essentially, what should a new third precinct building in the third precinct look like? How, give community a chance to actually authentically influence that. So geographically, where should it be located? What kind of other services should be combined into it? I mean, even the size, the way it relates to the community from a built form perspective, all of those sort of things. Explain the process around how the city goes about having these conversations, and be able to explain where community can have input that will affect the outcome and where community realistically isn't able to affect the outcome or have that input. And a good example of the latter, since my saying that might concern some folks, is just like realistically, the city needs to gather that input up front and then let that shape going out trying to find the site. But once you find a site, and it's going to be very difficult to find a site, then the city needs to really realistically move on that. There's not a scenario where the city is going to have 10 different sites to choose from for a community, and then, folks pick through. It's just not realistic with larger lots within the city. They're pretty limited within the third precinct geography, and not only limited, the number of property owners willing to sell is even more limited.
Well, thank you for spending 1 hour and 13 minutes with me, Andrew Johnson. It was a pleasure.
It was great. Thank you.
Best of luck to you on your future endeavors. This has been the Wedge Live podcast. I'm your host, John Edwards. Thank you for listening.
This is a real thing. Real thing.
None of you have the balls to stop this. Stop this.
I've got plenty of time. I have nothing else going on today.
We're in the Wedge neighborhood right now. Right now.